So I think that the key part of having an understanding of value co-creation is that we are not just pushing things to the organisational boundary and then they're let loose in the wild.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get the absolute privilege of sitting down with various BPM practitioners and professionals. And as you can imagine, it's a very diverse and broad subject. And so we always have very interesting conversations with the guests that I'm able to bring onto this show. And today I have the absolute privilege of bringing on Mark Higgins, who is a business process lead, and he has worked in a range of organisations and some of Australia's largest organisations and in various government departments. So I'm really excited for this interview. Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
So what our audience generally likes to, I guess, understand from the start is, or when were you first introduced to the topic of BPM, and take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think like many people, I didn't know what it was before I started. There are some people who know these things, and there are those who don't. I got into it. I started off, writing procedures in a telco. And that sort of developed into processes and getting sort of broader in the scope of what I was simply documenting. And I think a lot of people start that way in the industry. You get called on to document something and you find out actually there's more to this. Yes. And like many people, I started exploring what are processes and how do they work and why are they beneficial, and it was really interesting from a problem solving and an ordering and logical perspective to start understanding how organisations worked, and that leads in many directions. You look at business models, you can look at operating models, you can look at strategy and measurement. Things like the measurement of processes and how they affect strategy and things like that, where it leads in so many directions, and I think that there's sort of two paths you can go. Process can be a side job in terms of a business analyst role, and it's part of the larger role, or then there are experts and practitioners, and I sort of gravitated towards the process focus. So look, it's led me through a number of organisations as a consultant and an in-house practitioner and a lead, developing processes that are, in my view, I think the most important processes are customer-centric, and that's sort of where I've brought my skills in learning more about design and design thinking as well, and bringing that to the process world is what I'm very interested in.
Great. That's amazing. And I know that before we dived into this interview, we were having a great chat about a few different topics that you're quite interested or passionate about at the moment. And I think one thing that, really stood out to me, and something that I think, our audience would love to hear from you about, is this concept of co-created value, the business generating value, partnering with but understanding the consumers and what they bring along to the party. So let's sort of crack open that and flesh that open a bit.
Yeah, it's a big nut to crack open. That sort of came from, I was working as an innovation practitioner for many years, and I was looking at service design and human-centered design as well. But it was really when I started my master's at UQ, and I got introduced to this concept of service dominant logic. And the basic premise of service dominant logic is that everything we do is a service. Even if you're buying a product, you're buying that product to achieve a task, but be a personal task, gratification. You buy a piece of art, you're buying the art to satisfy yourself. It's a service. The art is providing the service of making you feel good.
Right.
You buy a phone or a car or something as well that is just an embodiment of all the skills of the people who built it to deliver you something. So the car gets you from A to B. There's the whole there's a really wonderful video from Clayton Christensen on jobs to be done, and he explains it with the milkshake, and I highly recommend everyone looks at it. But why do you buy a milkshake in the morning on your way to work? And it's a really fascinating thing. But there's a job to be done that we have that the product we're buying solves. So it's not about the product, it's about the service we're buying that sort of flows underneath it.
Right.
So what the basic premise is yes, the thing I'm buying doesn't necessarily have an intrinsic value to me as a consumer. It's how I come together and co-create value with that. A good example being a Toyota vehicle. You or I, we might look at that and we bring our own co-creation of the value of that vehicle to the organization. Toyota's processes, world-renowned, pop out some great vehicles. Unless you or I have the other half of that equation, our knowledge of Toyota, our understanding that their vehicles are high quality, the ability to engage with that process and buy one, the vehicle is actually meaningless to us. It's the certainty of Toyota. It's the quality of the vehicle that's been made. So what we actually find is that one of the axioms of service dominant logic is that all exchange, all commerce is service exchange. It's just that sometimes it's embodied through money or goods or services.
Right.
And so what that means is it gives us a very clear look then at what our processes need to be to enable those services. If, for example, our processes stop at the organizational boundary and we don't do that design work, the human-centered design, the service design and the customer understanding, our processes can still fail when we think we've delivered value. The process marches along, we produce something and it falls flat because we haven't actually extended our thinking out beyond the organization to look at how consumers are coming in and co-creating with us.
Right.
So a good example of that is in failure is a very good teacher. So you think about how you or I, we might apply for one or two or maybe three mortgages in our whole lifetime. Our bank might process 15 or 50 or 500 mortgages a day. And sometimes we feel a bit silly when we go to the bank and we say, here's all my mortgage paperwork. And they say, oh, you didn't follow our process. You've got to do this, this, and this. And it's traditional with large organizations and the government as well that we bounce off their processes sometimes. And as consumers, that's a bit jarring. And it's actually a barrier to success of the process.
Right.
They think that their process is very efficient, very, very serving of their needs. But without the understanding of how the co-creation occurs, how we as the other half of that party come together, we end up with what's called what's called an operant resource. It's our skills and our knowledge.
Right.
And every person has a set of operant resources. You might know a lot about the mortgage process if you've worked in the banking industry before. And so your operant resources in that process are very high and you can engage with that process quite seamless.
Right.
Me, never having worked in that industry, I can say, well, gee, this is really confronting and really weird. And you know what happens is I might not come back to that bank.
Right.
Until I've learned some things, until I've developed my resource set. So imagine the first bank I go to, they're in a really key position to be the first bank to catch me as a customer and then keep me for life. But if that process doesn't account for the resources that I'm bringing to the table, my lack of resources, my low skill in applying for a mortgage, suddenly I bounce off. And then I might try three other banks. And it's the fourth bank that I've learnt enough by bouncing off a bunch of banks by the time I get to one that I go, these guys understand me. And as a consumer, I'm mistaking the process. It's not that they understand me any better than the other banks. It's that, well, it might be if they've got very good processes, but it's more that I've built my own skills up.
Right.
So the broad structure of what happens in co-creation is we have to design our processes that adapt to those varying skill sets. Is it a different process or a different pathway that identifies a different customer type and gives them a different type of process or care or service? So again, I'm talking a lot about banking, which is an industry I've never worked in, but perhaps they have different pathways for a first home buyer to a investor to a whatever, and they probably do. And they adapt to different operant resources that the consumers bring into the process. The consumer finds that value in their right niche. So I think that the key part of having an understanding of value co-creation is that we are not just pushing things to the organizational boundary and then they're let loose in the wild.
Right.
The wild out there is an integral part. You can't model a process for a consumer. You can't tell a consumer what to do. But what you can do is you can employ those tools that help you understand who are our consumers and what skills and what operant resources are they bringing to the table. And then how do our processes respond and react to that? It's a design question.
Yes, right. And just on that, talking, I guess, we've got a diverse range of people that listen to this show and are coming from all different backgrounds. So I guess for those that are internal practitioners and they're trying to understand the resources that their customers are bringing to the table, what are those tools to sort of figure out what they are bringing to the party and what they are equipped with and how to understand what their journey?
It's really funny, actually. I think you've actually had Roger Belton on before, have you?
Yes, yes.
His Belton model is one of the tools that I go to quite a lot. You can look at the people and the technologies, and you can do that assessment of the activity and look around it in that Belton model and say, well, what are they bringing to the table? It's a very similar thing to the normal process tools. You can go and understand, there's the design thinking and the human-centered design tools where you go out, you sit with that customer, you observe them, you interact, you do what they're doing and use those modern design tools. But you've also got really core practitioner business process, BPM tools. What enabling technology does the customer bring to this equation? Do they have a smartphone? Do they have a computer? It's the same questions you'd ask of a process if you're looking at it through the lens of that Belton model. What competency and capacity and motivation is the customer bringing? So we use that Belton model, looking at our processes now, our process operators, our staff. We can also use it to look externally. It's quite a handy tool.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And I think
there's 100 other tools. That's just one example.
No, that's good. And I think we mustn't forget that we are also, all of us are consumers ourselves. We are all customers ourselves. And I think sometimes, I can think of many examples in my own personal life where, I might have had a poor a customer experience with an organization.
Right.
There was one a few months ago with a bank where, I walked into the bank because I was told over the phone that, you don't need to book an appointment. You just rock up to the bank. And I went into the bank and they told me, you need to call up and book an appointment. And so I'm thinking someone's not communicating here. So I eventually, something was able to happen, but ultimately as a customer of theirs, I did have a poor experience. And then there are other times where you go and you have just a remarkable experience and, it just leaves you feeling like this is a good organization. And
that's a really good point. And that comes down to another service dominant logic based thing, which is service recovery.
Right.
Okay. It may have been chance that you had those two experiences, but the first bank should have had a service recovery process. They should have said, it's okay. This happens sometimes. We understand you don't know our process, or maybe you've been misinformed. We got you covered, buddy. Come on in. Let's serve you.
Right.
And organizations can build service recovery processes if they understand the resources the customer's bringing to the table.
Yes.
You didn't know their process, but did they recognize that you didn't know their process?
Right.
Okay. We can't control you, the consumer, from the inside of an organization. But what we can do is we can react and we can build the appropriate service recovery processes. Some guy turns up and he hasn't got an appointment. Okay, here's what we do to serve that customer.
Yes.
And that it might be that they book one for you and they send you back another day. Not great. It might be that they serve you then and there in between, or they shuffle some appointments around or whatever.
Yeah.
But there has to be a recognition at the first point of customers don't know our processes. Someone explained they tried to book a physio appointment and the physio said, how many sessions do you want? And the person went, I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. You're the physio. And the physio said, well, have a think about how many sessions you want and call me back. Do you think that physio is ever getting a call back?
Definitely not.
Again, recognizing that there is a limitation or a diversity of skills on the customer side, a good process there might be to say, well, let's start at one, right? Set a default for your process that keeps things flowing.
Right.
Suddenly you've got a customer in the door. You haven't lost that customer. That customer is never calling back. And again, if it wasn't your bank, you'd probably never back to that organization, but you'd kind of attached to your banker in a little more deeply way. But you can lose that customer so easily. And people like Steve Towers and others have been talking about moments of truth and using that as an analysis tool for many years. Every one of those little interactions is a moment of truth.
Right.
And at any point it can go wrong. So we pick the big ones, we analyze them, and we plan for those.
Yeah.
Someone walks in without an appointment, what do I do? Someone calls up and they don't know how many sessions they want. Well, I argue that whole process should be changed, and we tell them, let's start with one and let's get moving.
Yes.
Don't even ask the question, too much choice. But we can analyze that, and that drives and guides what our internal process becomes, how we respond, how we recover the service, how we deliver the service, and everything that's associated with that. So that's the sort of the value in the co-creation. You can't co-create value if you don't have the skills and the operant resources to participate. A lot of organizations assume our customers have a level of understanding.
That's good. That's good. And what would you say is one of the main drivers of an organization adopting BPM? Obviously, there are many different reasons, but what do you see?
It's an interesting one. I think most organizations start with the need for consistency and stability. I think, from my experience where I've come into organizations, they say, hey, we need some process maps. We need to understand what we do. It's kind of the default space. But I think that we as practitioners, we have an obligation to show them what can really be done and what the importance of good process is. Yes, efficiency and all that historical stuff. I'm a big lean practitioner. I love it. But we got to go back to the root of that. The root of that was to deliver more for our customers.
Right.
People use lean as a shorthand for cost cutting. Well, it's not. It's a focus on value and talking service dominant logic. It's a focus on value co-creation, on bringing value to the customer for them ready to accept. Organizations and what we can do for them as practitioners is to educate them like this. Your organization can be more agile. It can be more responsive to customers. You can stop dropping and leaving money on the table for those customers who have a service experience and walk out the door again that they don't agree with. We can show them the value of business process management as being the glue that holds the organization together.
Right.
There's all these disparate sort of moving parts, and you'll see corporate performance management, and you'll see innovation teams, and you'll see design thinking and web UX teams, and they're all working on their little pockets of stuff. But that all of those things ultimately relate to how we operate, which is a process, and how we operate to serve our customer, which is the premise of the organization.
Yes.
So for us, it's drawing that tangible link. When an organization says, I need some processes, I need to know what I do, our job is to start lifting that thinking up a little bit as well. Right. Why do you need to know what you do? How are you going to employ this information to excel or succeed? How are you going to link this to your customer experience? Ask the right questions. Okay, well, that's a great UX. Your website looks shiny. A customer can't use it. What do we do?
Right.
Oh, does that imply there's a manual process somewhere? Do we want a manual process? Is that strategically viable? Do we have the resources to support a manual process? If we don't, again, one of the most magical things I ever heard was from Steve Towers, and he said, if you can't do something, you're screaming at your. So if I can't get to your company via the website, which is my preferred method, the company's telling me, go away, don't want to hear from you.
Right.
Likewise, if I'm an aging person engaging with my bank up and I don't prefer that channel, and you don't have a manual process that supports me, that bank is screaming at you, go away, oldie, we don't want to hear from you.
Right.
And I'm using old people as a generalization. Apologies to any old people who may take offense to that. Many of them are more technologically savvy than me, but it's just a shorthand, and I apologize for my generalization.
And when you see an organization, you know, that there are all of these drivers. I guess another one over the last 2 years, you know, it's been a very turbulent time the last 18 months or so. And I guess it's forced a lot of organizations to understand, well, what is it that we do? Because supply chains are changing, and, you know, we don't have towers full of employees anymore. They're kind of spread out across different cities and regions, all working from home. But I guess how has BPM played a part over the last 18 months? Have you seen it sort of move up the priority list, or have you seen it as it kind of not really prioritized?
It's a really, really good point. So there's a thing called the service profit chain, and it's basically work that's you can read it in HBR or wherever, and essentially it starts at the employee experience. Okay, and the very first link in this chain of profitability for an organization is giving employees what they need to succeed.
Right.
Okay, if you make employees have what they need to succeed, and process is a key part of that, knowing my role, knowing how to behave, knowing how to act, knowing what to do, which systems to interact with, which people, all that, giving them role clarity keeps people a little more happier. There's a number of other factors, but we're talking about BPM.
Yeah.
That then leads to a happier employee. A happier employee gives better customer service or produces better outputs. Better outputs keep customers happy. Customers happy means more loyalty, which means more profitability. That whole link all those links in that chain, they begin with an employee that's supported, and that's where organisations are seeing what they can get out of BPM as well.
Right.
My people will be happier if I can give them clarity in their role. How do I get that information in front of them? It's not a PDF on a SharePoint somewhere and saying, go check the process, mate. It doesn't work. And people are realizing that doesn't work, especially in this distributed work from home environment. I'm sitting in front of a laptop right now, and I need that information on my screen in front of me.
Right.
Like, I shouldn't have to go looking for it, because again, from a lean perspective or from an experience perspective, every time I have to go out of my workflow and find some piece of information, I get frustrated. I'm going on Safari trying to find information that should be here for me.
Right.
So part of the uplift in BPM is bringing that tangible organizational knowledge and process to people where they are and letting them seamlessly work. It's becoming such a big deal because of that very reason. We're not sitting in a room. I can't just go, hey, Daniel, shout across the office, mate, what do I do next? It's a few more activities and a few more steps that take me out of my workflow to engage with my human peers. So let's prompt that. Let's understand the resources that I'm bringing to the table. I don't know every process in the organization, but I do need to know what I'm doing next, how I'm doing it, what my workflow looks like, and how I engage with tasks.
Yes, right.
That's what the value is coming through. Bringing tangible information to people where they are is so critical.
Yes, yeah, right. And I guess in adopting that BPM approach and embedding it into an organization, what are some of the biggest challenges you could expect to face when embarking on that journey?
Oh, you're going to get me talking for hours. No, look, the reality is, I think the biggest thing is the simplicity of the mentality somewhere where we say, hey, we've got a system for that. Just chuck some processes in. We've got an analyst. They'll help you. Gee, it's a lot bigger than that. And I think that we tend to have these views that things can be shortcut. You can't just buy and implement a BPM system and suddenly your capability is up. It's a long process. It's like saying design. Can I shortcut design? You can't shortcut design. You
Right.
can't shortcut capability development. So for me, I think that's the biggest challenge, is that organizations may, I don't want to say underinvest, because it's not really about the money, but it's about the commitment and the drive to deliver this thing. We bought a system, we spent a couple $100,000 and the system's in, and why aren't we seeing benefits? And
Right.
we haven't changed the culture. We
Right.
haven't brought up our people and their capability. We don't have a process understanding. We don't understand how we measure and manage ourselves. We haven't set targets for that thing. Might have set a target. Oh, all our processes will be in the new system. Well, great, good target. How are we getting there?
Right.
And so adoption stalls, adoption fails, because entropy kicks in. Things fall apart if you don't give them attention. We need to start with an organizational focus, and that's where we start looking at change management tools, building champions, building process owners, getting them aware of what the benefits are to them. I like to do this thing of onboarding people with a frame, and I frame something up really simply. It might be like a lean waste walk of a process.
Right.
Okay, pick a process and say, well, look, let's go through it, and this is the tool. This is what it is. These are the 8 wastes, and we're gonna point at our process and say, oh, gee, I don't have the information at that step, and I'm human motioning over there and all this sort of stuff. And once they see that sort of thing through a tool or a frame, we can then show them the power of that analysis. We can say, you see where all these opportunities exist? Let's fix a couple of them. Oh, I can see that your people are always running to the printer and printing off this thing. What if we eliminate that waste for you? Would that be beneficial?
Right.
It's really small. It's tiny scale, right? It's right down there at the human level. But if that human being is a passionate advocate, preferably a senior stakeholder as well, passionate advocate, but it doesn't have to be.
Yes.
The word starts to get around, and then suddenly that person's going, hey, life's easy. I'm doing better. Word spreads, and we start to see it. But you can't tell them BPM's great and expect them to pick up on that.
Right.
We've got to show them a tangible output, and it doesn't need a system. It doesn't need a tool yet. Actually, yes, I can do a paper-based lean assessment and improve a process without ever going near any BPMN, as in modeling notation or anything.
Yes, right.
Write stuff out. We can look and solve problems.
Yes.
But that problem solving involves the stakeholders. It's not us doing stuff and telling them, here's a better process, go do it. It's them coming in and providing that input, owning that process and saying, oh, we're not running to the printer anymore. Aren't we great? We helped come up with that. And then they start telling other teams, and then the word grows. That's sort of my shortcut to breaking that entropy. People have really basic tools. I've got people at the moment who, they've got some lean waste stuck up and maybe some 5S little simple instructions stuck up on their wall next to the cubicle. And they talk about this language now. Oh, that's human motion. I've got to go take this thing over there and do this thing. We shouldn't be doing that. And even just at that diagnosis level, they can start to see, I have a problem in my work. They're not talking processes. This is my day.
Right. Yes.
I don't like getting off my butt and running over there and handing you this document. Is there something we can do about that?
Right.
And that groundswell of cultural change as well. When people are thinking about process, they may not be the most senior stakeholders, but guess what? That word gets around.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
This thing is better. This thing is better. We're doing better, and I know how to do it. It's not power vested in a practitioner to tell them how to do things right. It's people constantly evolving their way of doing things, and that comes right back to the whole, again, Toyota and lean foundations, right? That's why it's that way.
Yes.
People are owning things, and that's magical. There's no boffin, no Mark out there going, oh, this is what process can do for you. They're telling us, hey, look at this. Can we get some help can we get some help to implement it? Yeah, sure. Yes. That's what you guys do. But we've got the ideas and we've got the power, and it's really it develops passion.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love I love hearing you talk about that. Having ownership, people getting ownership of their processes, and also feeling empowered that they're in the best positions to identify pain points and problems and hurdles and challenges. And they're probably in the best position as well to identify, well, what are the solutions, or how can we overcome this? And I was just having a conversation with someone the other day. And in their organization, and they have very limited resources in terms of their process team, but they've done a whole lot to what can we do as the few people that we are to empower the subject matter experts, the people at the coalface, the people doing the actual work. How can we empower them and equip them? And they've organized like this monthly meetup, this monthly catch up, where we can give you advice, we can collaborate, we can share ideas, and they've found that after four months of catching up, these process guys can even skip one of these sessions because there's just that sort of like collaborative thinking that's already happening.
They're talking the right language. And again, it's those simple, obvious things. Like again, lean-based is powerful because any person can point and say, "See that stack of paper over there? That's an inventory waste or whatever it is, and we can 5S that."
Yes.
They start talking our language and they own it, and they're front level obvious tools. We're not talking about detailed process analysis. We're not talking about doing digitization and automation yet. We're talking about solving pain points and giving them little cures that starts the journey. Yes, we're digitizing stuff now, and yes, the people who are experts in this industry, we will have a role, but the role gravitates upwards to a more strategic technical role than a ground level doing day in, day out process improvement. And that's, again, if you look at your history of process improvement, that's what Toyota were doing in, what year are we in? 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Right.
It's not new. We just need to remember that it's not about us putting boxes and arrows on a page and saying, here's a process. It's about building that coalition of people who think differently and think about processes. And again, back to my earlier point, think about the customers and their resources so that our processes are genuinely effective. Right. If we're not building a process that is co-creating value, we're in a bubble in our organization that is not engaging. And if you leave it up to an innovation team, or you leave it up to a design thinking team, or you leave it up to a UX team to bridge that boundary, you've got to disconnect.
Yeah.
Your process has to be seamless. It can't be handed off to another team. You have to work with them.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's just that's where we get to, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We start with people solving their annoying copy and paste from one system to another. We solve it with a person not logging in 3 times to 3 systems. We solve it by simple not printing something that doesn't need to be printed. That's where the pain is for every worker. And again, the most value. You've got 2,000 frontline workers all doing the same awful, repetitive, mind-numbing task. Eliminate that task, and you've got 2,000 people who are telling you how good BPM is.
Yes, yeah. Well, on that point, do you have a case study or an example that you can share with us that obviously censor the details that you're not allowed to share, but where a process was analyzed and a solution was brought forward where it did deliver significant value to both the organization and the customer?
Yes. Thinking of one that I can tell you about is the trick. I don't want to breach anyone's trust. Look, I think that one of the interesting ones was looking at an insurance process, and I won't name names, but doing some work around what happened when we engaged repairers for an insurance process. And the old process was that very paper-based, very obvious stuff that had been around for 20 years, where we email, they used email, which was great, instead of a courier pigeon or something. But that was the height of the technology. Look, and I don't mean that by an insult. That's what they had. And people would email out a PDF requesting a quote, and then they'd get 3 quotes back from 3 different repairers, and then they'd assess those against the rates. They'd figure out what it all meant, and then they'd authorize one to proceed and email back a letter that said, "You're good to go. Here's the customer details." But pretty standard process from, let's say the 90s or something. Yeah, probably 1990s. That was at the time a reasonable process. And this is where again we have an obligation as practitioners to bridge that digitization into digitalization.
Right.
You don't just take that process and put it into a system, because the process is broken. So what we did instead was we digitalized it. We actually looked at what digital tools could do for that process.
Right.
And without going too much into the detail of it, we ended up having set rates pre-negotiated with repairers where we knew the repairer. They could just tick yes or no to accept. We'd have an understanding of what the damage was. The system would match their rates with our assessment of the damage and tell us which one we should choose. Things like that, where they didn't need to go to work assessing and writing a quote.
Right.
We didn't need to go to work comparing their offers of cost repair. Everyone got what they needed. If they needed to change their rates, they changed their rates once with us centrally.
Right.
And then they just tick, yep, I'll bid on that job, and their rates would come through. Seamlessly bringing the data together to improve that process. There's no getting a document, reading it, marking it up. It was all systemized. And that's that push into digitalization. If we'd just taken the process and workflowed it, for example, you'd still have people pushing documents around. You'd still have this bloat, this waste in the process.
Right.
So that's a good example where once we show people, and I talked about giving them a frame to look at something through, and once we give people a frame and we say, well, here's the waste in your process, how do we eliminate that? By the way, here's some digitalization options. This is what data you have available to you. How can we reuse that to solve that waste? The people did the work. They said, well, hang on. The same piece of data comes through 32 times a day. It's a rate for repairing something. And they never change their rates.
Right.
Great, let's get their rates once.
Yeah.
Okay. That wasn't me being clever. That was me equipping our practitioner, our people operating the process.
Yes.
To think about their own work in the right way.
Yes.
And then they turn around and they say, we've fixed this process, isn't it great? And that's the best feeling.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And when we look at the future of BPM over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and I guess where you see organizations, I guess, reaping significant value from a BPM initiative or adopting BPM, where I guess what trends are you seeing, and where do you think organizations should be investing their time, effort, and energy?
Look, I think there is a huge investment at the moment, again, in service design and design. I think that I'm not alone in that thought, that organizations need to be more encompassing that process. If you look at things like even just tools like a service blueprint, okay, it connects a customer journey to a set of processes to ensure that the processes are enabling the customer journey, right? Organizations that have to build that linkage. We used to have, a good capability in process world of linking things to other things and showing that value. And I feel that it's been lost a little bit. You used to do balanced scorecards, and process is one of the 4 layers in the balanced scorecard.
Right.
It talked about direct enablement of strategy. It talked about, that's what the balanced scorecard did. We now need to talk not just direct enablement of strategy, but direct enablement of customer excellence, customer understanding, customer success. And that's sort of the direction that I see a lot of organizations are moving. The world is getting more competitive. I can change banks in a day now. I can close everything and ship out whenever I want to.
Mm.
I can evaluate 24 competitors because I'm an analyst and I would do that. Most consumers won't. But I can analyze all these different organizations and see, are they the right one for me? Are they easy to deal with? Are they going to give me what I need? I can do that from home. I can do that. I'm sitting here again. I'm in front of a laptop. It's my resources. I'm going to employ those to understand your organization. Those organizations need to be, if they're the first one I click on, I shouldn't be going somewhere else.
Yes, right.
The process and the UX and the everything has to draw me into that organization.
Yes.
So I think that there's a huge, and that comes down to the promise as well. I talk about value propositions a lot. Value is co-created. Organizations don't create value. They create a value proposition that is responded to. So how does the organization get that value proposition ready for a customer to engage with? It's through their processes. And if the value proposition is stated as one thing, but the processes don't deliver it, you've got dissonance and you're essentially lying to your customers, and they will see it.
Right.
They will see through you if you say, we care about the customer, and then we kick you to the curb when you're late on one bill.
Right.
Customers will, that dissonance will come very, very clearly through for customers. We care about the customer, but the first thing we ask you is, how much money do you have to spend? It's saying one thing and doing another. The process has to support that value proposition.
Right.
And that works in employee value proposition as well. It's not just for customers, it's for employees. We say we're an employer of choice and we do this cool stuff, but then the very first thing you get is a shonky HR process of onboarding and just some of them are really ugly. If you start day one and they say, right, day one, here's how probation works, how do you feel as an employee?
Right,
what a crap process.
Yes.
Probation's important. I'm not saying we should do away with it, but
Yeah.
that shouldn't be our opening thing, is a position of defense and assumption of guilt.
Right.
Why don't we have a process that makes probation this awesome chance to show us what you do?
Right.
What's the probation process look like? If we're an employer of choice, that process can't be a negative process. It has to be a process that empowers and uplifts the staff member on their first, 3 to 6 months. So again, you're looking at that proposition, that value proposition at the edge of the organization. Every process has got to align to that.
Yep.
And we have the tools now as a profession to do that.
That's great. That's really good. Well, Mark, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today, because, I've certainly been learning a lot from this conversation. I just love this topic of, co-created value. I think it's very interesting and something that has come up in different conversations, in different interviews before, but I just love the way that you were able to articulate it and communicate that. I've certainly been learning a lot, and I'm certain that our audience will have learned a lot from this conversation as well. So I just want to thank you for catching up with me and sitting down and having this chat today.